Okay, let's get started. Glad to see so many of you here. My name is Jesper, if I can get this to work. Spent the last roughly 18 years working with mostly larger Agile change and lean change initiatives, also larger programs, and usually working with mid-sized, big-sized organizations in terms of hopefully changing the way they do innovation and product development. So that's almost exclusively what I've spent the last 18 years on, both within IT, but also working with different types of products like enzymes and microorganisms, or the actual physical construction of a wind turbine. Today I'm going to be honest with you. So to me it's still kind of frustrating that in 2023 we're still dealing with so many unhealthy structures around the great teams that we're trying to build. And still we think that by putting even more focus on the team level processes and all the method wars and discussion about whether one approach is better than the other, and still we've just got structures around it, still making it so incredibly difficult for those teams to succeed no matter the agile level mechanics that they try to implement. So this talk, to a large extent, is born out of frustration about these rigid method wars going on, while still failing to deal with the very essentials of building an effective organization. So meet John, Joanna, and Josh. So they've all had great experiences with Agile in the past in different companies. John over here, he loves Kanban. He loves all the things about flow and WIP limits and building the feedback loop towards customers and making sure that there's a short feedback loop from whatever getting something started until getting it done and actually evaluating whether it hit the market. We've got Joanna. She's equally passionate about Scrum. She loves Scrum. She loves the planning meetings. She loves the whole Timework thing, the roles, everything in there. And we've got Josh over here. He's really inspired by Marty Kagan. And he loves the whole product trio thing where you've got designers and engineers and you've got the product manager inside this trio, and they do all this great discovery work. And the thing is, since they've been hired by Fake Agile Incorporated, none of them are happy anymore. And they don't understand it because they're doing all the stuff they're usually doing. And they're focusing on the same stuff, but whatever seemed to work in their previous companies, it's just not working here. And still they're trying to do more of the same. So it must be something with the WIP limits, or it must be something with the Scrum roles, or it must be something about this product trio not being set up in the exact same way as in our previous company. But it seems that the problem is not really with their approach. All of those might actually be successful, and all of this could be successful even within the same context, because they're so passionate about trying to make it work. Why is this not changing? Come on. There we go. Because there are lots of elephants in this China shop. And these elephants are walking around and they're breaking things, and it seems that somehow everybody agreed, let's not face them. Let's just ignore these giant elephants. And sometimes I find myself walking around saying, are you serious? Incentive schemes looking like that in 2023, and you don't think that has an impact on how people actually work? Or the way you're set up in terms of structure, or the way you're set up in terms of your portfolio management system, or your yearly budgeting cycle, or whatever. And people are just, I'm going back to my retrospective. Or, yes, I have this management meeting coming up. See you next week, Jesper. So all these structures are really closely connected. Whether you talk about how you lead, not what you lead, but how you lead, it's really crucially important. How you're set up in the organizational structure and how your teams are set up facing markets, customers, etc. How your portfolio structures look, how your budgeting structures look, and how you do the whole financial thing. How strategy connects with strategy execution, aka our team levels. How these incentive structures in terms of how we want people to work and what they're attracted to do. And again, how our leadership structure, and this is really odd because if you had asked me 20 years ago, I would have thought that naturally if you have an organizational structure, that's the same as your leadership structure. But the problem is just that some organizations apparently don't buy into that notion. So they can have one way of looking at the organization from a team level perspective, and then a totally different way of looking at it from a leader perspective. And those can be at odds with each other. And again, people seem to want to rather put their heads in the ground and ignore that problem altogether. You can even have people saying, okay, so now I found tech. So if we just build modular code, we're just going to be fine because all the teams can just release independently and people are just going to be happy. And it turns out they all think they found the silver bullet, but they found them in isolation. And all of them are thinking, if you just do like I say, you're going to be so much happier and it's going to solve all your problems in the entire organization, not realizing that all these structures are really closely connected. Oh, now it's working. Got there, that shit. Come on. Why can't I get it to just jump one slide ahead? I'll try again. Yes, there we go. So each are focusing on one tiny part of what is an organizational puzzle, and where each actually has the potential to ruin a lot of other stuff around it, even if you do it really right. Even if you have the most modular code architecture with segregation of concerns, strong cohesion among your elements, if you have a dysfunctional leadership structure around that, I promise you, it can really, really, really damage no matter how good a tech stack and how you're set up operational-wise. And I know some did try to look at this as a whole system. The problem is just that they took the wrong perspective. So had they done this right, working from first principles and not trying to apply 300 agile buzzwords in an entire model and say there's only one way of doing all this down to the very operational level of how you estimate user story, maybe they could have got some healthy discussion going on here. But instead, these RUP guys, they took RUP from 96 and then they applied it in 2015. And fortunate for them, it now seemed that the market was ready for a really complex solution to the wrong problem. So again, and I've seen this happen dozens of times, you can hire all the agile coaches you like. You can have all the expensive team training you like, but if you don't deal with all the structural elements around that, there's a high risk that you're going to just be wasting your money. And I'll even go as far as saying that if you get the structural things right, most of the other things, they will follow, if not free, then at least a lot less expensive compared to hiring, I don't know how many external consultants to drive your agile initiative purely bottom up. You can also choose whatever preferred prophet you find out there. And they will tell you things like Ken Schwaber here, Scrum is like your mother-in-law, it will point out all your faults. Yeah, except it's only faults from your mother-in-law's perspective. They're not actual faults. They're faults in terms of trying to apply Scrum, true. There might be something around the product owner role that's not set up entirely as the Scrum Guide would like it to see done. There might be something about the time box that you do slightly different, but that is a problem in terms of applying Scrum. It's not necessarily a problem in terms of applying Agile. And still, if you have these structural elements in place, there's this nice glass ceiling, and these guys can keep climbing all they want, but they're still going to hit it, and they're going to hurt their head again and again and again and again. So let's look at a few examples. Maybe you've seen this. This is not something I've just seen once. I've seen it twice, and I've seen it 5 times. So you have this old portfolio process, and it looks really old, and it's kind of hard to market your organization to the outside world. So you find that there's something called a lean product canvas, and that must just be great, right? Because if we have lean product canvases, we can't be all that old-fashioned. So you don't change anything about your portfolio process. It's still a yearly budgeting cycle. You still provide funding for maybe individual features or epics going a whole year into the future. But now you use lean canvases to actually collect the information. Or maybe you just took your business case and you just translated into the same information into your lean business canvas because it now seems that you are much more lean and agile. You will also probably face the fact that the team structures you have, they might be teams, but they might also just be teams doing a yearly budgeting cycle as a feature factory. Because how much are you going to iterate when the goal is set in terms of pure output for a whole year? You're probably going to chase that output for a whole year, and you'll pay very, very little attention to the actual impact of whatever software you're trying to build, because there is no capacity to iterate. You've committed your entire budget and capacity for most of a year. How are you going to make it very attractive for those teams to look at the actual impact when everything around them is measuring on the output they're trying to provide? This is one that was quite odd. So I visited his company, and they had put a lot of money into becoming much, much better at early validation. Because they were seeing they had quite long product lead times. It was physical products, and it was probably years, not months or weeks. And they would see business cases erosion of about 80% from getting an idea to a new product and comparing it to when it would actually hit the market. So they were doing lots of cool product discovery stuff. But still, those business cases, they just kept inflating. Because they forgot that the incentive scheme in the entire organization would give people a higher salary compared to how the business case looked. Not in terms of how when those products met the market, not in terms of realized value, but in terms of the sales pipeline. So you had an entire incentive structure with bonuses attached that would make people inflate these business cases, no matter the nice tools and processes they were trying to install. Come on. It's not just... There you go. Yeah. Also seen this. So, how many of you are working in product structures or product teams? Quite a few. So the thing is, a product is not a product. We have at least two types of products. We have technical products that will enable us to deliver value to external customers, markets, users, etc. And then we have technical products, which are more in-house products that are enabling us to do that. And if you start organizing around your technical product structure, you're going to get a lot of technical products, but you might not get something that's very relevant from a user perspective. And it's going to be really, really difficult to drive business development from a technical perspective, because you're likely to face that to deliver the actual value. You need to hit around 3, 4, or 5 other teams around you. But instead, you're going to try to do technical product development with a business focus, and that's going to be really, really difficult. But you might still apply all the great tools, and you might form trios, or you might have great product designers or UXers, but if they have stuck to doing that from a technical product perspective, it's not going to matter a whole lot. This is also something, and that's about the thing I brought up earlier, where we have set up a great business-facing structure. So it's outside in, teams are focused, and then we just forgot that there was a management layer just going across with a totally different perspective. It could be a newly hired VP of marketing, just smashing the whole thing together. Because they are coming in there to market whatever they think, and they're coming in with their old-fashioned marketing plans, and they want to do the big bangs and everything. Or you can have, maybe there was a problem with security, so now you hire a VP of security, because naturally all those teams are now going to do much better security because you hired a VP. And again, they have a totally different agenda, and it's security, and they're not going to pay much attention to the fact that you want to get something quite often into the market. They're not going to balance the need for business value compared to being secure. They're just going to focus on security. So again, you can have suddenly agendas that are just crossing all your teams, making it really, really difficult for that individual team to find out what are we going to prioritize and whatnot. And adding up, if it's both security, and it's architecture, and it's marketing, and it's compliance, or whatever management structures you suddenly have crossing these team structures, it's just going to be really, really difficult to prioritize. And has remained with some type of ownership from the team level. Sometimes we also find organizations that have really bought into the whole product discovery aspect. But again, if your team setup represents an outdated structure. So it might be when you formed your organization, your team structure matched the type of products and markets that you were trying to address. But markets and products, they have a tendency to shift. And if your team structure is not following that shift, you'll suddenly find yourself trying to do product discovery on something that's suddenly not a direct one-to-one relationship to what the customers or the market or your business is trying to achieve. And then you find yourself innovating in a space that's no longer where you want to innovate, purely because your team structure is set up to do something different compared to where the market shifted, maybe in the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I don't know if you've seen this, where the organization will go full on, agile, lean, all the methods, the tools, the mindsets, you name it. And the thing was, the managers in there, they got like half a day of training. They were told, you're no longer a manager, you're now a leader. Okay, that's cool. What does that mean? We don't know, but Please lead instead of manage, and you'll probably be okay. By the way, we forgot to change any of the roles and responsibility documents in there, so at the end of the day, we'll still ask you, are you fully certain that you're going to deliver to the deadline within the scope, whatever? And by the way, you're still responsible for these people and these teams, and they have a really difficult time navigating that space because on the one side, they're told to lead, not manage. They're told to be servant leaders. They're told to apply intent-based leadership or whatever framework of choice. And on the other hand, they're told to still be ultimately responsible for the end result. And often, as long as everything is just proceeding and it's fine and people are happy, they get to be the modern manager and apply all these new fancy leadership frameworks. But as soon as a crisis hit, they're just going to be blamed for not being the old-style manager that they were trying so hard to get away from. So it's really difficult also for the teams to navigate in this space because they're just getting all these conflicting elements. And on one side, one day they're seeing one type of leader, and the next time they're meeting their traditional manager. Second final one. Some organizations are tech-heavy. I think that's a great thing. I think it's great that we're trying to become tech companies, that we're trying to move away from the notion that business always knows best and we're just order shakers and we know actually more about the technical possibilities also in terms of how we can use that to make even better solutions for companies. But the problem is if the organization is still separated in two parts, where you still have your traditional business unit thinking of IT as an order taker, and you have IT trying to move into the product development space, they might even start to hire product managers or product owners or business developers, then you have this clash because you didn't think about the organization. You just thought about tech, and you just thought about one of it. And there's just going to be confusion because nobody told the business on the one side that they're no longer just the ones asking for something, and then your supplier is going to give it to you. Suddenly you find them trying to compete for the same agenda. And the business is not necessarily just going to accept it. Suddenly there's some clever guys over in IT that are suddenly investing a lot of time in becoming business development units rather than just IT. And final one, hopefully, or fortunately, I see this less and less, but 10 years ago this was just a really big thing, where you would see all the Agile coaches being in there. They would coach people, they would set up Scrum teams or whatever type of Agile method, but they would just forget entirely about the stable team structure. So people would be in these teams for maybe a week or a month or 2 months or 3 months, and then it will just be disbanded to address the next product or the next project. And until the fact where these people, they were just so confused that they didn't want to put in an effort anymore, because their social context was just shifted all the time, and their mental capacity to invest in becoming better in the long run, collaborating with these people, just went out the door. So they gave up like half a year maybe into these initiatives. It's less of a problem now. Team topologies and all these great methods, they've strengthened the notion that probably we want not static teams, but at least stable enough. And my rule of thumb is if you see a team of 8 people, and more than 1 or 2 are rotating in and out of those teams within half a year span, you don't have a stable enough core to actually drive continuous improvement for the longer run. It's just my rule of thumb. And I get it. Our brains are lazy. So it's really attractive whenever somebody comes along with that silver bullet saying, if you just focus on your leadership approach, all your problems are going to go away. Our brains will readily accept the fact that if you tell me that just do more Scrum, have the perfect product owner and the perfect Scrum Master, and make sure you have that fully stable cadence of events every second week, you're just going to be really, really happy, and you're going to provide great products to your happy customers. Your brains will just readily accept that because you don't need to think. And if you put that on a larger scale, if somebody tells you, use this safe framework, and you don't have to change anything because it's as hierarchical as the world you came from, but you get to use all these modern buzzwords in there and tell the world how agile you've become, that's a lot easier for your brain to accept than starting to talk about first principles and what are we really trying to achieve and how do we need to set up our organization to be truly value stream aligned, because SAFE's notion of a value stream is just taking whatever structure you've got and saying that's now our new value stream. I know I'm being a bit harsh on SAFE. But it is a really, really bad idea. Good. And consultants, they're really good at selling this as well. And they're getting even better. And we're starting to see Boston, McKinsey, Bain, Implement, PA, whatever big consultancy out there, they're moving into this space. And if there's one thing you like as a 2023 consultant company, it is a fixed framework for just hiring 5 junior consultants, sending them on a 5-day course, and you can just throw them directly in there and they'll be experts from day one. And that's what you can do if it's just simple and you don't have to look at the organizational picture. Because as soon as you start to talk the organizational stuff, then you need the senior people in there. And you don't have that many, and they're really expensive, and you don't earn as much money on your senior consultants. So whenever you can just have your juniors in there running with a really simple concept, that's just money in the bank. So I'm not going to lie to you. This is not necessarily an easy exercise, but I also have a few positive notes today. Because the good thing is that when you start to address this from a more holistic perspective, it does work the other way around too. So it's not just that things are incredibly hard if you work purely bottom up. And if you try to think that if you just do more process at the team level, everything is going to be all right. It's also the fact that as soon as you start to mingle with these structures, you suddenly break these chains, and it becomes a lot easier for these great teams to actually do some real business development. And Conway's law, like 50, 60 years later, still applies. How many are familiar with Conway's law? So at least half. So just very briefly, Conway's law pretty much states that you're limited to producing the kind of products that are defined by your organizational structure. Pretty much simple. So that means the way you communicate internally is going to translate directly to the type of products you're going to be able to do externally. So that means that you've set yourself up to do stuff the right way internally. You can actually reverse Conway's law to make sure that you start to look more outside in at the market. One thing to notice, right, because this is, again, where it becomes slightly more... I haven't seen one great way of organizing yourself, but it needs to be outside in for you to succeed. For some, it's perfectly fine to do it based on geography, because sometimes, like for example, the Chinese market, it's just so different how you are regulated, the things you can and cannot do. So some companies will maybe have a product type structure, but for China, they will just set up a part of the organization to work purely with that market in a very specific way. That can be one great way of doing it. But you can also base it on your customers' value streams. You can base it on the type of industry that you're trying to. In one company, we managed to reduce your stakeholder landscape by more than 70% on average for teams by them being industry specific. And that means that you can get a lot deeper into that domain. You can start becoming an actual sparring partner towards those type of customers, because now you start to know the domain and you know your cognitive load is brought down by more than 70%. So there's not one great way of organizing yourself, but if you want to deliver great products, you need to organize yourself primarily outside in. And another thing that's really crucial, and it's been like, for the last 10 years, I've been preaching this again and again. The rest, where you cannot do it on your business value streams or similar, you need to make sure it happens on market terms. Whenever you set up platform teams or enabler teams, they need to operate on market terms. They cannot force a single team or a single individual to use their fancy whiteboard architecture or their great deployment pipeline or their great security. You need to operate on it, and you might think it's for the benefit of those stream-aligned teams, but it's not. It's for the sake of yourself. It's so much more fun going to work and actually having a notion of serving your customers than trying to control people, force people, have them use it. I visited one company. They had a full department of 15 people, and all they would do would call the individual teams and tell them that they didn't follow the operating model exactly for the type of work that they were trying to do, right? That's just a horrible place to be. Nobody likes to be that type of person inside the company anyway. Or some like it, I know. But would we really like that type of person to be people we're paying to show up every morning? Maybe not. The one thing, when you've then tried to analyze your situation, and you might have a good idea of how you want to set yourself outside in, then try to validate it with some actual cases. Either cases coming up in the near future or things that you've recently done in the past, because that will tell you something about how are the dependencies. How much are you can you do 80% of the work where teams or family of teams can just focus on that one industry? Or is it the other way around? Is that they can do 20% independently and then the 80% they will have to coordinate with the entire world around them? That's not going to make them very happy or effective in their day-to-day work. So try to take some cases and actually walk those cases through the entire value stream from concept to cash. And be careful. You're not going to find a modern organization with a complex set of products with hundreds of people where there are no dependencies between these teams or families of teams. There will be dependencies, but it's just about getting to the least bad solution and minimizing that coordination overhead, because otherwise, if you don't do that, the only solution right now out there that can help you if you set yourself up bad enough, that's something like SAFe. It will actually allow you to coordinate all those dependencies that shouldn't be there. But that's really expensive. Recently, I visited a company, and I was really happy going in there. I knew that this big SAFe initiative, I was going in there looking forward to hearing them complain about all the stuff that was now going to be wrong, so I could come there in like a brilliant consultant and tell them, oh, you just have to do this differently and you'll be much happier. The thing was, they were quite happy, and that was puzzling me. And then I found out that they had set themselves up in a very atypical way for a company using SAFe. Their entire company was distributed to the point where they would have a board of directors, but they would have no say. All they could do was advise. And then you have fully independent business units headed by champions that could literally do whatever they wanted. And they had copied that structure for each country to make sure that they were as adaptable and autonomous in their local markets that they could possibly be. So they were accepting a huge overhead in terms of building the same thing, literally sometimes 13 times across different countries for the sake of business agility. And to be honest, obviously, looking into it, you could manage the feedback loops in a better way. You could work on even smaller batches had they not used SAFe. But if you look at it from the outside, I would still say they were doing better than the average Agile company out there, even using maybe 80-70% of all the SAFe structures and processes underneath. So that just goes to show how important structure is. If you get the structure right, even with processes as bad as this, you can actually still achieve some level of business agility. Good. So how do we do this? What are some step-by-step advice that you might be able to take home to implement in your organizations? So one thing I would really ask you to consider, it's something that's crucially important to me, and I can't imagine a situation where I wouldn't want to have this conversation with an organization that I'm going into. I call them first principles. You can call them core capabilities, core beliefs, whatever. But it's basically a set of principles that's somewhere between a mindset where you cannot talk about Agile in specifics, because as soon as you start talking about it, it becomes something that's almost illegal because it becomes too concrete, to having process mechanics like Scrum or whatever, saying you have to do it this particular way. But it's saying something like, okay, if you're working in small batches, if you're getting those batches into the hands of customers and you're investing in a feedback loop, I don't care how you do it, but if you do that, you're probably not too bad off. If you have an outside-in business-facing structure and the rest of your structure is operating on market terms, maybe you can do it in different ways, but probably you're not too bad off. If you have enough strategic alignment so that for each team out there, there's a purpose and they have clarity in terms of whether they're here to deliver the best possible dog toothpaste or create biodiesel, that's probably also a valuable thing because then they don't need to think about the entire world of enzymes when they go to work. Again, an example from outside IT. If you invest time in decoupling your technical architecture and you invest time in automating all the stuff that you don't need to do manually, probably you're not too bad off. But however you choose to do that, we will give you the freedom. And we don't want one Scrum Master sitting there blaming another team for not doing Scrum, because as long as they are following our core principles or core beliefs, we acknowledge that they're probably okay, and we will leave their local intelligence and passion, because that's an important thing. I think still your choice of specific method or framework and the success is much closer related to the passion and willingness to succeed than the method itself. And I've seen teams doing flow-based agile and another team doing Scrum in a very similar context, and they're both succeeding. Not because of the way they're doing it, but because of their willingness to make whatever choice of method they had succeed. Also, the next thing is just aligning our perspectives. So I invest quite a bit of time. Okay, that's great. You have a perfect idea. It belongs up there in the toolbox space. It's not a first principle. Scrum doesn't belong there in the middle. It's up to the left here. Great that you're bringing in some modern product discovery tools. We could really use that when uncertainty is really high and it's much too expensive to build software from day one. We want to really validate those business assumptions before we start building a lot of tech. Great, let's bring that in there. But that's not a core principle. That's a tool to try to validate business assumptions early. And however we choose to use that tool is dependent on our uncertainty in there. Oh, great that you'd like us to focus on our business result and market shares or whatever performance metrics from Accelerate. But those are lagging indicators, so they belong down here. There's something we're trying to achieve, but we cannot follow them day to day in terms of what we're trying to do. But we have an assumption that whatever we do up there will ultimately lead to something up there. I like the fact that you brought it in, that we are not just safe doing retrospectives at the team level to improve. We need something bigger than that. Perfect. That's our improvement engine over here, making sure that we constantly get better at things in the middle. A number of years ago, presenting at a conference in Paris, one from the audience asked the guy on the stage, what would you do differently next time? And he said, next time I would start with the mindset. There's just a tiny problem with that. You can't do that. You cannot plug in a mindset into an organization. Mindsets, they form from your actions, not the other way around. So you need to do the stuff up there to have your organizational mindset change over time. You cannot do it. You cannot just put a mindset chip in the back of people next, and they will suddenly from one day to the other become much less risk averse. But the problem still being that they're not doing those things. So whenever they take risks and things go wrong, the effect is catastrophic. So you're not going to take a risk next time. But if you put yourself up in a space where risks are suddenly really low impact, then you can start to change the mindset around risk averseness. Another thing I would really hope you bring back home, whenever you do change management, then don't use a waterfall approach to do agile change management, right? That's like bringing one tool in to implement the opposite. So if you think vertical slices are a great idea when you do products, probably vertical slices are not too bad when you do organizational change initiatives. Probably if you think investing in a feedback loop to think whether things are following what you hoped in terms of outcome, maybe you want to look at outcome too and not just output in terms of the number of training sessions if you're doing organizational change. So as you would do, pick a vertical slice, as for any sensible product manager out there. Probably that will also buy you some freedom, because it's much easier to get permission to experiment with new structures, new leadership approaches, etc., in a limited part of the organization. And yes, there might be something down here where there's still part of the old world interacting with the new world, but it's much cheaper to accept that for a limited period than trying to deal with all the noise of changing how 1,500 people work from one day to the other. And then dare talk about this. It's not dangerous. And I think you will find that, for example, if you find yourself in a program or business unit leader position, I have a good advice for you. Pretend that all these things are already in place. So just pretend, and suddenly you'll start to find weird things happening. So it might be that your yearly budgeting process told you to focus on output and roadmaps in the traditional way, but if suddenly within your program or your business unit, you're starting to do things differently, just pretending that these new things were in place, you're not going to get that much of a pushback. Maybe you'll just get people like, oh, that's really interesting. It sounds much better than what we've been failing at for the past 10 years. Could you just show me how I do it? How you do it? And it doesn't really matter if it's a business unit, if it's a program, because those all represent vertical slices. What you cannot do is think that, yes, I've done success within a single team. Now I've proven it, and we can just scale it to the entire organization. Unfortunately, doing something for a single team in a complex world, you have proven absolutely nothing. The only thing you've got from a single team pilot is that you've got a great story to tell that you can use for marketing purposes when you want to get the permission to do something more. A funny thing happens when I interview organizations and I talk to the CEO, VPs, SVPs, middle-level management, developers. Weird things happen, right? You talk to an SVP and you, okay, so what's wrong? What can we do better? What are the constraints? And they'll give you sort of vague answers. And then you talk to a front-end developer on a team, and he'll just be to the point. Okay, our management structure is wrong. These teams should be organized in this way instead. The way we do the feedback loops towards our customers is inhibited by this and this and this. But if you just do these 5 points, we'll be better off. And you'll be saying, yeah, I totally agree with you. I just wish that that type of insight was present at the management level where they're trying to do stuff that you just told me about. So make your voices heard. And I have a prayer. Dare sometimes to bypass middle-level management. Dare try to, at that town hall meeting, present the case of being a developer in your specific company. Map the value train from you trying to deliver something until you can actually deliver, and show that it's 80 days and you spend the 60 days waiting for other people's permission. Dare go directly, knock at the CEO's door or the VP's door and talk to them about, because you will find that often the middle-level management layer is the problem in terms of acknowledging these perspectives. While at the VP, SVP, CXO level, they're actually kind of flexible people. And they're not impacted in the same way. If you go to the middle-level management layer, they'll be losing control, or they've fought 10 years to get into this position, and if they follow your advice, they can just see themselves losing some of that ground. But dare try to start this conversation at a different level. And I've seen it happening in multiple companies. They will listen in 9 out of 10 cases. Good. I've made the case that maybe team level agile mechanics are not as important as we'd like to think. That doesn't mean they're not important. The way I like to talk about this, that whenever we throw people into the deep water, if they've never tried something before, we need to provide them with a starter kit. Could contain elements of Scrum, maybe some flow-based elements of Kanban, maybe something from Marty Kagan and Inspired, but we put that starter kit together to get them going for the first maybe 2, 3, 4 months until they've kind of gotten the notion of what this is all about, so they can start to improve on their own, staying close to these first principles, of course. But please do not accept agile coaches that will tell you, just use this starter kit. I can't tell you why, but in the end, you'll be really happy if you just do this over and over again. That's just them telling you, I don't understand it either, so I can't explain to you, but therefore I don't want to. This wax on, wax off, it might work for Karate Kid. It doesn't work for intelligent people that spend 5 years in the education system trying to understand complex problems. Instead, what you want to do is challenge them from day one. Okay, we just spent 15 minutes at a stand-up. How did that improve our ability to do work better in the next 24 hours? Not at all? Probably something is wrong. Guys, now you spend an hour trying to estimate user stories going 2 weeks into the future. How has that helped us make better decisions? Nothing. increased predictability, probably we shouldn't continue doing it that way. Same for planning meetings. Same for whatever type of process element you're trying to put in there. Ask the why, especially in the beginning when you're trying to develop the mindset of we're not just doing this for the sake of doing it, we're doing it for a specific purpose. You'll get much deeper understanding and you'll be getting a lot of credit for actually asking the why instead of just telling people, show up for a draining 7-hour session and I can't even tell you why you should do it, but you'll be happy 6 months down the line. Good. So remember, they're starter kits and there's no data out there suggesting that there's one agile method or framework to rule them all. No data. Whenever people are telling you Scrum is great, a proven method, there's nothing out there in terms of real research backing that claim. The only thing we've got is actually what they've done as part of the DevOps survey, where there are some things suggesting that some of these core principles or core beliefs, they actually stand the test of real data. But that is not down to the level of doing Scrum or something else. Good. So that was it. Some key takeaways for you to bring back home, what we've been through this session. And I think we might have 2-3 minutes for questions if some of you would like to ask. Otherwise, that's it. Yes, a question at the back. I don't know, could you yell or should I bring the microphone? Great. Yeah. Insurance company. Yeah. So they were doing, obviously there are local adaptations, regulations compared to whether it's Finland or it's Denmark or it's Sweden or Norway or Germany. But still the fact that they chose to replicate the entire thing at least told them about their value in terms of having champions, ownership and market adaptability. Good. Other questions? Nope. Thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed it.